this way. Come on, buddy. Come on. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Let me just take a moment to introduce my good buddy here. Come on, turn left. 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 Walk back with me. Back, back, back. Good boy. Mr. Argon. Come on, have a seat. Does everybody know what a service dog is? There's a few people don't. I saw a few heads shaking. Let me take a moment to just tell you about Argon and the work that he does and about service dogs. Maybe you know about guide dogs. Guide dogs are dogs that assist people who need help with their vision and can't see and move around very well. They might be blind. But dogs help people with all other kinds of disabilities nowadays. And I'm Argon's trainer. Argon's my trainer. And I've been training Argon to assist somebody to walk. Right now he's not wearing his brace. The brace is tucked away back there. But when he's working, he wears a brace on his back, and he becomes a four-wheel drive walking stick. Right? But I'm not going to talk about that this afternoon. Instead, this afternoon I want to talk about atoms and molecules and nanotechnology and things like that. So with any luck, Argon's just going to take a little siesta, and I'll get into my presentation. Argon, come on over here. He likes to be with me. Come on, up, up. So the first thing we got to do is switch from that presentation to the one I really want to show you, which is this one. I titled it Exploring the World of Atoms. And the reason I chose the word exploring is because that's so important to what scientists do. We get to explore the unknown. For me, that's like the coolest thing in the world, because I really love discovering new things and understanding things that have never been understood or never been discovered before. That's something that I think is really cool. So I'm going to tell you about my own work, and we're going to explore the world of atoms. Now, there's all kinds of questions that you can ask about atoms. First question I thought I would ask is, who started thinking about atoms and why? Anybody got any ideas? Yeah? The Greeks. I've got a great audience today. Yeah? Perfect. As far as we know, as much as we've learned from history, it was the ancient Greeks who started thinking about atoms. They were really remarkable scientists themselves. They were great philosophers. And so this is a picture here of the Parthenon in Athens. And this is a famous painting from Raphael. And these are supposed to be the great Greek philosophers. Sometimes I think this is supposed to be me just taking a little nap on the steps sometime. Right. Why did they start thinking about atoms? They really wanted to understand the world around them. And they started thinking about, well, how small can things be? And one guy named Democritus got the idea that maybe there's a smallest unit, and you can't make things smaller than that. And came up with the idea of atoms. And he's very famous for this quote of his, in reality, there are only atoms and the void. In between the atoms, there's nothing but emptiness. So what are atoms made of? And so let's build a carbon atom. And the way we're going to build a carbon atom is from the bottom up. And we'll start off with the basics of the nucleus, which is made from protons and neutrons. Carbon atoms are really important. Does anybody have an idea what's so important about carbon atoms? Right. It's because I'm made out of a lot of carbon atoms. Carbon atoms are the stuff of life. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen. They're really important to us. Carbon atoms require 6 protons and 6 neutrons, the same number of neutrons as the protons. And then what you do is you just swirl these things together and you make a little nucleus. Well, that's going to be the very center of the atom. So now what we need to do is shrink it down to make room so we can see the electrons that we're going to add. So let's shrink that thing down and make it really small. It's just a little tiny thing there. Actually, I would have to shrink it even more, but then you wouldn't be able to see it. And now we get to add the electrons that form the outer part of the atoms, actually the most important part of the atoms. Carbon's going to have 6 electrons, just like it has 6 protons. We're going to add 2. These form the inner shell of the carbon atom. And then we're going to have to add 4 more. And these 4 more are called the p electrons. And now we finally have what is a carbon atom with a little nucleus right in the center and the electrons surrounding it completely. So how small are atoms? If we had 5 carbon atoms and we just stuck them together in a straight line, they don't actually form a straight line, but suppose we could, that would be about 1 nanometer, which we learned was a billionth of a meter. But let's see how this compares with something that that we're all familiar with. So if I were to take those 5 carbon atoms and shrink them down to the point where they were just 1 pixel wide on this display, then I could compare a nanometer with a micrometer. A micrometer is 1,000 times larger than a nanometer, but it's still something incredibly small. You can't see a micrometer with your bare eyes. So let's take the micrometer and we'll shrink that by another factor of 1,000 and make it really small, just 1 pixel wide, and now we're up to a millimeter. A millimeter we can all see. It's just about that big. So you can see the gap between your fingers real easily. How small is that? It's hard to put that into perspective. How small is a nanometer? So the way I tried to do it was to compare it against something that we all know, the width of our finger. And if you were to just take those carbon atoms and line them up one after another in a straight line, it would take about 100 million carbon atoms to stretch across from one side of your finger to the other. They're really small in some sense. They're so small that 100 million, I can't even imagine what 100 million things next to one another would look like because I've never ever seen that in my life. So why are atoms important? Everything that we see around us is made out of atoms. The molecules, for instance, a DNA molecule, which gives my body the instructions on how to grow and become a human, made out of atoms. One of my dogs, this is neon, not argon, he's made out of atoms. These kids, just like you, made out of atoms. The Earth, it's atoms. This galaxy somewhere out in the universe, it's all atoms. Everything is made out of atoms. And how atoms interact with one another and what are the properties that result when you stick different kinds of atoms together is what makes us all different, what makes the floor different from me different than argon. But in some ways, we all have these great similarities with one another. We're all made out of the same stuff, atoms. So how can we see atoms? Well, we can ask the question, how do we form images of small things? Let's not worry about atoms yet. Let's just talk about small things. Anybody got an idea? How do you see small things? Yeah? How do you think we see small things? A microscope. Of course. So let's build a microscope. The first optical microscopes were invented by a scientist named Robert Hooke. And I would love to show you a picture of him, but there's no surviving portrait of him, so I had to draw one. Right? But I think it's really a good resemblance to the way he must have looked. Right? So he built these compound microscopes, was looking through there and discovered all kinds of things. He was the first to image cells. That's a really extraordinary accomplishment. Something that's really important about the way optical microscopes work is they use something called wave optics to magnify something. And the light that you use to see the object, a light comes as a wave. And what lenses do is they just bend the wave. So they take what might have been, I have to put this stuff down to show you. They take what might have been just a flat wave moving like this, and they bend it and they spread it out. And what happens is, just like the way my fingers spread out as I let my hand represent the spreading of a wave, the gap between my fingers, something small, grows to be something large. That's magnification, and that's just the way that optical microscopes work. Now, optical microscopes are beauties. Here's some old ones here that I'm very fond of looking at. But you can only see down to the level of really small bugs or maybe little cells with microscopes like this, and you can't see down to the level of atoms. This doesn't even get close. But there was another microscope that was invented back about 80 years ago by this guy named Ernst Ruska. And he was a guy who developed another kind of microscope called an electron microscope. And that lets scientists see much, much smaller things than just cells. They could see the things that form the insides of cells for the first time. And that's because it uses waves, but at a different wavelength. And it uses a special kind of waves, the waves that electrons are. But the way it works is really the same as the way an optical microscope works. It works by bending the waves and making something that was small large because you could bend it and expand it. And then came along these guys, Gerhard Winnig and Heini Rohr, in the early 1980s. These are my colleagues from IBM's laboratory in Zurich, Switzerland. And they invented an incredible new kind of microscope called a scanning tunneling microscope. And this doesn't work at all the way microscopes before it used to work. It works in a very different way. Now, I want you to help me. We're all going to make a little microscope. What we're going to do is we're going to form an image of our hand, but we're not going to look at it with our eyes. I want you to take your finger and put it on top of your other fingers like this. Okay, and now just move your finger along. And you can feel your finger going up and down as it goes over your other fingers, right? So you can move your finger back and forth, and you could form an image of the shape of your hand by just feeling. Close your eyes. You can feel what the shape of your hand is. That's just what these guys did. But they made an instrument that was capable of doing that, where it could sense the shape of individual atoms. So the way the Tellme microscope works is you have a metal needle, and this is the thing that you want to image. We call that a sample. And we have a robot that allows us to move the tip around very carefully with a lot of precision. If we go and we take a good close look at what's happening at the end, somewhere at the end of that metal needle, there are the atoms which stick out farther than all the rest of the other atoms. And that's what this part represents. This is the end of the needle. And then this is a surface that we want to form an image of. And this is made out of atoms. So here I've got a plane of atoms that you see. And then I drew an atom sitting here on top. This is just a cartoon. This is not a real image. I have the computer control where this tip goes, and I can bring it close to a surface. And then the computer can move this tip along, just like you moved your finger along over the top of your hands. And this tip will follow the contours of the surface. And the computer can draw for you, because it controls it all, where the tip went and how high it was above the surface. So from that, we can get an idea that the surface had some atoms on it, because we can see the individual bumps here. Then what we'll do is we'll ask the computer to just go along and form an image of the entire surface by moving the tip back and forth over the surface, just the way you moved your finger over your hand in different positions. And then when it's all done, it forms an image like this, and these are the kind of pictures that we see, where now every bump corresponds to the location of an individual atom. And what's really extraordinary to scientists is we never could see things like this before. We don't see it with our eyes, we see it with our instruments, but it provides us with a great visual representation of what the surfaces might actually look like if we could see them with our eyes. And this is a picture of the tunneling microscope that I have in my laboratory, or I had in my laboratory. And this is the little robot that moves around a metal tip, which is the equivalent of, does the same scanning of the surface as our fingers did at the back of our hand, but finer. This is about the width of your finger right here. And it is really an extraordinary instrument. Welcome to my world of atoms. Let me just tell you what you're looking at. This is a picture of some platinum atoms. Each one of these bumps is a single platinum atom on the surface. Here's a bunch of xenon atoms on top of a metal surface. The xenon atoms have come together to form a little, we call that a little raft of atoms on the surface. And here's some xenon atoms sitting on top of a step edge, looking out over another plane of atoms down here and a higher plane of atoms up on the top. Atoms used to be really, really small things that nobody had any access to, nobody could play around with, nobody could see with any kind of instrument. That's changed. Atoms are now a huge thing. Look at this monster, it's gigantic. That's a xenon atom, and xenon is my favorite atom. Sorry, argon. So one of the things that we learned to do in our laboratory was to take this tool, which was invented for imaging, to be kind of our eyes to the world of atoms. We learned how to use it as a set of hands, allowing us to manipulate individual atoms. Let me show you how we do that. We take advantage of the fact that atoms are sticky. Now, is it important that atoms are sticky? I think so. And the reason is, what do you think would happen to me right now if atoms were not sticky? Anybody got an idea? I would fall apart. My atoms would just take off and go everywhere. So every morning when I wake up and I find that I'm still intact, I think that's the coolest thing in the world, because atoms are sticky. Right? So that's actually really important, because that's how we use the microscope to manipulate atoms on a surface. What we do is we bring the tip down so close that this atom on the end of the tip begins to stick to this atom on the surface. And when that's the case, if we then take the tip of the microscope and we move it sideways, guess what's going to happen? It's going to drag the atom with it and bring the atom to a new location. And then if we want to leave the atom here, what do? We just take the tip and we pull it back, but it leaves the atom on the surface because these bonds here are stronger, or if you like, stickier, and that leaves the atom in a new location. What's really cool about that is it allows us to take atoms and put them where we want. Now, the first thing we did was to write out IBM. I'm very proud that I got the spelling right. Extremely proud that I got the spelling right. But think about how we do things. We design and build things in our lives to do things that we think are useful. So for instance, somebody had to design and build these chairs because it's useful to sit in a comfortable way. Imagine all the useful things that you could do with atoms and molecules if you could put them where you want them to go. Here are some molecules that we built by taking the individual atoms, just like building blocks, and snapping, just like Lego, and snapping them together. Right? But what's really neat about this is these molecules cannot be built by any other means. They're quite unique molecules. These are molecules made from two different kinds of atoms, from cesium atoms and iodine atoms. And we play with them just like Lego blocks. They snap together in particular patterns, and we bring the individual atoms in, and we snap them in place, and we can form these really quite amazing structures. We learned how to build these things called Quantum Corrals, this circular ring of iron atoms on top of a copper surface. And what you see in here are a bunch of waves. What's really special about this is these waves are just due to the electrons on the surface. So it allows us to explore how electrons behave inside of very, very small structures. We also went on to build the world's smallest computer circuits. These are very special circuits. They don't operate like normal computer circuits. They're made from carbon monoxide molecules on a metal surface. But what's very special about these circuits are how small they are. They're much, much smaller than what we use in our current technology. So the Tellme microscope allows us to explore new ways that we might build computers. For those of us in IBM, that's very important, of course. So what I want to do is, to get lucky, I want to try to run our Tellme microscope from here. The Tellme microscope is over in California. And the way it's going to work is we have the Tellme microscope in the laboratory in California. It is controlled by the computer in the laboratory in California, which is connected to a computer, which itself is then connected to the internet, which is connected to my laptop here. And so from my laptop here in the auditorium, I'm going to try to connect all the way back to the microscope in California, and we'll see how that goes. There's the laboratory in California. That's the connection from San Jose to Boston. And just to make it a little bit more lively, I think what we'll do is let's call up the guys in the lab in California. Ooh, I love this sound. This is great.
Hello?
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
Hey, Don.
Hey, this
Yeah.
is Chris. Say hello to the audience.
Hello, everybody. Would you like to examine some atom?
Yeah. So are we ready to go?
Ready to go. Start it up.
All right, let's try. So I'm going to go to the website. All right, let's try to log on. Okay, so this is an image of the actual tunneling microscope in the lab, or the room temperature part of it. The microscope is in very good vacuum and at very low temperatures. And this is to simulate some of the instruments in our laboratory that we'll be using. And then we'll see the images showing up over here. So let's see if we can scan over the surface by pressing on the scan button. The microscope, the whole apparatus is about, I guess, about 14 to 15 feet tall. But the microscope part of it is just a little tiny thing. Everything else is what you need in order to achieve these conditions. Welcome to the world of atoms. Let me describe to you what we're looking at. The tip is scanning across the surface, and every time it goes across, it comes back, and then it goes across, it comes back, and it does this fast, as fast as what you see here. Just like your finger went across your hands, and it had to go up and down to go across your hand, the tip has to go up and down across the surface, and you can see the trajectory of the tip in the virtual oscilloscope over here. And then, over here, we're seeing the area that we're imaging. I'm guessing that it's about 8 nanometers by 8 nanometers in size. That's roughly about what it is. And the grayscale that you see here is being applied as if there was a light source shining from left to right. So these are bumps on the surface. And you can see the bumps show up over here. But let's take a look at the 3D way of looking at the surface. So we'll press our virtual 3D button over here, right? And we'll ask the computer to take the same information that you're seeing over here and display it so you can see the individual bumps on the surface. Today, we have a surface which is made out of copper, a pure copper crystal. And on top of that, we have both cobalt atoms and copper atoms. I'm not sure which atoms we have that we're looking at right here. These might be copper, they might be cobalt. Well, that's Chris. Maybe he knows. Hey, Chris.
Yeah,
Are those copper atoms or cobalt atoms?
copper atoms.
Ah, thank you. Copper atoms.
Sebastian picked out 4 atoms for you. Is that what you see?
Yes, that's what we see. It looks very good. And they're looking really quite nice, I must say.
Well, they're individually selected.
Ah, thank you. Okay, so I think what we should do is try to move one of these guys. What do you think? Is that a cool thing to do? All right, we'll give it a try. All right, so what I'm going to come over here is I have to come and tell it that I want it to finish scanning. So I'm going to press the Finish button. And then we'll wait for it to finish this image. So it keeps on scanning over and over and over again. Oh, and it stopped. Okay, then what I need to do is I'm going to have to press this Move Atom button. Now what's happening is the tip is no longer scanning across the surface, but the tip is located right here. Now remember, to move an atom, we have to put the tip over the atom and then bring it close to make a sticky bond to the atom. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to this atom that's up here on the top. Okay, now the tip is up high. Now with the next click of the mouse, what I'm going to do is lower the tip down towards that atom on the surface. Oh, it's down. Okay, so, oh, that's a good sound. I'll tell you about that sound in a moment. So let's try moving the atom down this way. I'm controlling where the atom goes by using the mouse on the computer here. That looks like a good spot. One more click and pull the tip back, and now it's going into the scanning mode. So you see how easy it is? You just press some buttons, you just click and drag, and you move the atoms around. Right? These are real sticky atoms. If we brought 2 together, they would form sort of a 2-atom kind of molecule that we wouldn't be able to take apart. So I'm not going to go do that right away. But there you see it. Real atoms. This is not a simulation. In San Jose, California, about 3,000 miles away, inside of a vacuum chamber, cooled to nearly absolute 0 temperature. It's actually about 4 degrees Kelvin. There's a piece of copper. On top of that piece of copper, there are 4 atoms, and we just moved one from up here to down there. Now imagine what you could do with that. If you could put atoms where you want them to go, where would you put them? What would you learn? There'd be all kinds of things to do. Being able to do that is not only really valuable in terms of how we advance science and our knowledge, but as you've seen, it's great fun. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. And the microscope's up and running. So if you want to come up and try moving an atom, it's just come on up. We'll give it a try. Bring it back. Right there. Okay, left click. It's gone. Moved an atom.
Yeah!
Score, dude. You did it! Yay!